Hey, science.
Yeah, conspiracy?
Do you know what the biggest conspiracy of all time is?
No, what is it?
That the Earth is a ball, is a globe. It's flat.
You're kidding, right? Everybody knows that the Earth is round.
No.
Well, technically, it's a sphere, but still.
No, it's flat. That's why they say from the four corners of the world.
That is so funny. That's just a saying.
But it had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, from the Bible. But
Yeah.
we all know the Bible's not
Real.
fact.
It's real. Anyways, folks, as you guessed it, we are talking about flat Earth. Full disclosure on this episode, I don't believe the world is flat.
Really?
I think it's one of the more ridiculous theories out there.
Okay, good.
Yeah. It's obviously a globe.
Good.
But for the purposes of this episode and for science, I'm going to take the devil's advocate position and say the Earth is flat.
Okay, but you don't believe the Earth is flat.
No.
You are not a quote-unquote flat earther.
No, I am not.
Okay.
Brew some coffee, pull up a chair, and open your mind. This week on Science vs. Conspiracy, we talk flat Earth theory. All right, so let's get into the flat Earth theory. Okay, so flat Earth. So you think that the world is a big ball and not on a flat surface.
It is not a flat plane.
It is a flat plane, and I have proof.
Proof,
I
he
have
says,
proof.
hesitantly. Okay.
Right. So the world is on a flat plane surrounded by an ice wall in Antarctica. That's why we can't go to Antarctica.
Okay, but there have been research expeditions in Antarctica.
True. However, they've been controlled by the U.S. and other governments, tightly controlled who is allowed into Antarctica to do this research. And there is a giant wall of ice at the bottom of Antarctica that nobody can get past, and that's kind of what's holding everything in. In 1947, Admiral Richard E. Baird was in command of Operation High Jump in Antarctica. Officially, Operation High Jump was to establish a research base in Antarctica called Little America. However, there was another objective to Operation High Jump that we talked about in the Secret Moon Base episode, so we don't have to get into it here. Go check out the episode. We'll leave a link in the show notes. The mission also revealed the existence of a giant ice wall acting as a barrier. He also made claims to finding the entranceway to Hollow Earth, but we'll talk about that on another podcast.
Okay, so these ice walls,
Mm-hmm.
icebergs.
No, but they're massive.
So are icebergs.
Yeah, but no.
I know you're being devil's advocate.
Yeah. So, like the ice wall, they can't fly over top of it because it's too high. It's too thick and too dense, and the weather and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the weather. There you go. I was waiting for you to say it's not about the ice wall being thick and high. It's about the weather.
Well, that's part of it, though.
At the pole.
Yeah, but it's not at the pole. It's at the sides.
Okay.
At the edge.
Okay.
So unlike conventional theory that the Earth revolves around the sun is actually about 50 kilometers away. That and the moon are about 50 kilometers away from the Earth. And the sun is actually acting more of a spotlight, sitting over top of the center of the circle of the flat plane, and it just kind of spins around in like a spotlight, creating night and day.
Right.
And the moon is roughly the same distance away, a little bit smaller, and that's how we get the day and night, and that's why we see the moon. But the moon isn't this ginormous planetary body. It's a smaller object in the sky.
Okay, so now do you want me to rebut this now, or save up all of my rebuttals until you're done with your supposed proof?
Wait till you're done, because I'm sure you'll have so-called other proof.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I have something to say about the sun, but you go ahead.
Okay, so the other thing that flat earthers talk about, that there's no actual photographic proof of the Earth.
Uh-huh.
So all the photographs that we see we do a Google search and we type in Earth and all these supposed NASA photos of the Earth, when you look into it, they're all composites of images and fakeness and just fake images and manipulated together to create this ball-shaped object in the sky. There is no actual single photo of the Earth.
Okay, composites.
Yes.
Okay, all right. We'll go with that for the time being.
Well, you can Google it and look for original photo of the Earth, and nothing will come up.
Okay.
And then there's the big thing, the curvature. So
I knew you were going to get to that one.
well, it's a huge thing, because if there was a curve in the Earth, then that would possibly suggest that that the Earth is a ball and not flat.
Right.
But when you go up really high, and all these pictures that we're seeing, of the so-called curvature of the Earth, they're all being taken with a wide-angle fisheye lens and creating this curvature of the Earth.
Right.
Because how else, if it wasn't flat, when we look over into the ocean, we can see objects that are so far away, and they're sitting on top of the water. But there should be rules against if the curve, if the world is being if the world is curved, then there's mathematical distances that we shouldn't be able to see because of the curvature, but we're able to see far beyond that.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what do you got?
Okay.
Prove me wrong.
I'm about to. Don't you worry. But here's the thing. Before I do, though, I just want to say, I think it says more about the people who believe in the flat Earth than the actual theory itself. These people, I think, are most likely to fall into one of a few categories.
Mm-hmm.
People who, like yourself, conspiracy, although I know in reality you don't believe in the flat Earth, you are into a lot of conspiracies. And it's people like you who don't trust authority, regardless of whether or not they actually believe the theory. Okay, so this is one category, I believe. Okay, I believe that it's people who are contrarian and don't trust authority, regardless of the theory. And this mistrust generalizes to all sorts of authority figures, not just the government, but also scientists. And it's funny because actually one of the papers that I was reading about mistrust notes how, ironically, conspiracy theorists, instead of putting their trust in a big government agency or scientists, they're actually just putting their trust in another authority, whoever told them this theory to begin with. And those sources are usually even less credible than the scientists and government that they mistrust. But anyway.
But have you ever met the scientists that talk about this?
Okay, so category 1, contrarian people who don't trust authority. Category 2, I think, are people who don't necessarily fully believe either, but they don't want to spend the time to bother looking at the science to prove themselves or others otherwise. And then category 3, people who really don't understand the science and thus really do believe the theory. So none of these are insults, nor do I look down on any single category of people, but it is dangerous to let people go on talking about things like this that is just so scientifically wrong. Because as this shows, when something like this gains traction, it makes other illogical assertions even more palatable for the masses.
Right. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just gonna pop in here and say, because in 2017, that rapper B.O.B.,
Yeah.
no relation, thank God, he started a crowdfunding campaign,
Which went nowhere,
which
by the
went
way.
nowhere. He was trying to get $200,000 on GoFundMe. His group, he wanted to launch a satellite into orbit to prove that there is no curvature of the Earth, and so that there'd be absolute proof that the world was flat. So this is just an example of what you're talking about, of people who
Yeah.
positions of influence that people kind of grasp onto and try to create this following.
Yeah, so it can get quite dangerous. And then that's where things kind of generalize and then spill over into other things. The science behind the shape of the Earth is really, really clear. And, there are so many images from space that clearly show our planet is spherical.
But those, again, conspiracy part, those are just images that have been manipulated into a globe.
Okay.
Globe shape.
So there's a live stream of Earth from the ISS.
Yeah, the ISS is fake too.
Okay, well,
We've never actually been to space because there's a dome over the Earth that acts as another barrier preventing space travel. This dome sits 58,000 kilometers into the sky. NASA calls it the Van Allen belt or the radiation belt, which makes it impossible for people to pass through. They would get radiation poisoning. In reality, it's that dome that we can't pass through, and that's why we've never actually been to outer space, quote unquote.
okay, well, that's really not true that we've never been to outer space. There's lots of evidence.
We've
But-
stayed in lower Earth's orbit for the last 50 years.
Well, okay, so I mean, if we want to digress to the Van Allen belt, we can talk about that. We should probably save that for another episode.
I'm just saying that's the dome. That's the dome that's preventing us from going into outer space.
Okay,
'Cause
the magnetosphere is part of the Earth.
Mhm.
It's part of the Earth's atmosphere, right? The magnetosphere is like one layer of the Earth's dynamic environment.
Mhm.
But definitely it's out there. But so are satellites.
They don't exist.
Yeah, okay.
They don't launch them.
Okay, so we're really digressing here.
No, but
Let's-
that's what the hardcore flat Earth theorists
Sure.
believe, that we've never been to space. All the satellites and satellite communication, everything is just being beamed from either high points or high atmosphere, low Earth orbit
Yeah.
probes.
Well, it takes a great deal of commitment to, refuse to believe that we've never been to space, to refuse to believe that the Earth is round, and these do often go hand in hand. Definitely the people who refuse to believe that the Earth is round are often the ones who deny the images from space, deny that we've been to space. So definitely that's something that's, highly
Yeah.
frequently mentioned, for sure.
Yeah, they even have conferences that are attended by 600 plus people
Oh, yeah.
annually.
600 is nothing for a conference. I've been to conferences.
And there's
Anyway.
Let's move on.
Okay. So, we'll move on to one of the next points about the Earth's edges being surrounded by a wall of ice holding
Yes.
in the oceans, right? So this is fascinating because sure, maybe the first guy who said that, that was in the 50s. Maybe his boat wasn't that great. Maybe his technology wasn't that great. But now there's enough science and technology to capture images. Right now, the largest iceberg in the world is over. This is the they've named it the A76.
Okay.
It's in Antarctica. It is 4,320 square kilometers in size. So it's 170 kilometers long,
Mm-hmm.
25 kilometers wide,
Okay.
and more than 100 meters high. So, of
Right.
course, somebody would think it's a wall. You know, if you encountered something like that and you can't get around it, of course somebody would think so. But they just don't know any better. Because back then they didn't have access to the technology to understand that this is just a portion of what goes on out there.
Yes. But
But
if there wasn't an ice wall, then the water would be flowing over the edge, just like on Asgard. Whenever they would show a faraway view of Asgard, that is on a flat plane.
yeah, that doesn't help.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't help pushing the theory
Yeah.
of a flat Earth.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what we're talking about here. And these are gods, and
Yeah.
this is stuff that's been talked about in mythology for centuries. The only difference with Asgard and what we're talking about with the ice wall, in Asgard, the water flows over the edge and goes somewhere.
Never explained.
Never explained. But in the ice wall, it's just surrounded by a massive wall.
So another one then is about how the buildings are visible beyond the horizon if the earth isn't flat.
Exactly.
All right. So have you ever seen, you know, in cartoons when somebody's in the desert and they're crawling and then all of a sudden they see an oasis with palm trees and water?
Yes.
It's called a mirage, right?
Right.
Okay. So this is actually what's happening in those photographs. It's actually really cool. They have what they call inferior and superior mirages.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when the air, so if we're talking about, there's like one famous one, and there's a really great image from Physics World that I'll link to in the show notes to describe this. But there's a famous one, I think it's Chicago or something. And they're looking out over the water. And so what happens is the air directly above the water's surface is colder than the air higher up.
Okay.
Right? And that makes sense if you ever think about going swimming. And so the light rays refract toward the colder, denser air that actually allows an image of the reflected skyline formed on the water below the horizon to appear like it's hovering above the horizon. And this notion, this can actually even be verified, they say, by taking a photo that's even a little bit further away.
Mm-hmm.
And then the superior mirage will disappear. So think about if you've ever looked at hot pavement, hot blacktop, right?
Yep.
And you see the air, you can actually see the heat coming off the road, and it's kind of wavy.
Yeah.
So that's the same kind of thing. It's that mirage, and those capture the image of the skyline and reflect it so it looks like you can still see those buildings, but you actually can't. It's just a reflection from the water, essentially.
But when we're watching an F1 race and they're showing the grid, and it's the middle of the summer, and they're getting ready to race, and you see the shimmering and everything, but I don't see any buildings in there.
No. I'm just using this example of the famous photo of the water, and then it's showing the buildings, and they're like, well, how can we see it if the earth is round? It should be curving off over the edge, and then you wouldn't see the buildings anymore. And that's what a lot of the flat earthers use as an argument, but it's actually really easily explained by science.
But if that was true, though, we would still see the reflection of the stadium, of the stands in there.
No, because this is talking about water as a reflective surface, specifically, this one.
Right. But the black tarmac would act
Well,
as the water reflecting.
No, it doesn't reflect. Do you actually see yourself if you're standing on the road and you're looking down, do you see yourself on a hot day? Do you see yourself in the pavement? If you do, you should get your eyes checked. But if you're standing over a puddle on the road,
Yes.
you will see yourself, and it's because of the water. You don't see yourself just on black pavement.
Sure you do.
Okay, you should get your eyes checked, or maybe your brain. But let's move on to another one,
Okay.
because the Earth being the center of the universe, the sun out, right?
Yeah, it's only about 50 kilometers away.
Okay, so that's like driving from Hamilton to Toronto. It's like in Ontario, right? If the sun were that close, first of all, life as we know it would be obliterated from the heat.
But the sun isn't as hot as they say it is.
Okay, all right, that's just so inaccurate.
It's more like just like a big spotlight. And it doesn't really give off as much heat.
Yeah, it does. That's how we have warmth on Earth.
No, it's other
This
ways.
isn't just a heat light in a restaurant, right?
Essentially, that's what it is, though.
It isn't.
And it just circles around.
Oh, that's so funny. So if it circled around like that, there's actually this really brilliant physicist who created a model of what this flat Earth would look like. Okay. Now I know flat earthers have done it too, but they haven't done it with enough actual knowledge of physics to make the model actually scientifically accurate to their specifications, because none of these are actual physicists who have created it. So this physicist made a model of what flat Earth would look like using the specifications that the flat earthers use. And there are several contradictions.
Okay.
But I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, but I specifically want people to start the timestamp at about 6 minutes, because he talks for a while, and he's, he's a retired physicist, and so he kind of takes his time talking, and, it sounds like a grandpa, but he's brilliant. And so one of the massive contradictions that has to be pointed out here is the pattern of the sun, sunrise, sunset, and the size and locations.
Okay.
So sunset and sunrise happen at different times depending on your latitude.
Right.
Do you disagree?
No.
If the Earth were flat, someone in Toronto and someone in LA would see the sun rise and set at exactly the same time.
No. Because the way the spotlight and the way the spotlight is shining on in different areas, and as the small sun is spinning around up above, it's shining on parts of the world.
So you
different
haven't
times.
watched this video.
No, but I've seen animations of.
Yeah, but those animations aren't as good or scientifically accurate. What he shows is that in our hemisphere, according to the flat earther theories, the sun would rise at the same time in Toronto and LA. It would be different for the other hemisphere, but in our hemisphere, it would be the same time if the Earth were flat, if this theory were true. And it's just not true. And moreover, if the Earth were flat, we would always see the sun in the sky, because these circles that it goes in, even though it's not always at the highest point, again, which still is not accurate in their models, even if it were not in the highest point that brightly illuminates us for daytime, we would always see it because it never falls below our horizon in these models. It's ridiculous.
But if it's more like a spotlight, so think of the spotlight, the light coming out of it on one side, and there's darkness on the other, and that's what that's what spins, though.
No, but in this model, the spotlight is always here, so it would always be aiming down.
I know, but it's not, though. It's shining on an angle, and you got to look at the map that we're talking about in the flat Earth, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up, and I forgot to bring up earlier, was if the world isn't flat, then why do the United Nations
You're
and
getting off my topic
But we
about
don't-
the sun
but we
and
got-
and the moon.
but we got to talk about the way the Earth is actually positioned, the way the land masses are constructed in order for the sun to be pointing down and shining in your model, what you're talking about, in a certain way.
Okay, so I guess we should have watched each other's videos of support for both sides beforehand, and so I guess maybe that's a little learning opportunity for us going forward. Is maybe we should share some of our. But the thing is, we can't share everything because it's fun to surprise each other.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say that in the representation I watched, which is based on actual science,
Science doesn't exist.
the sun rises and sets. It would be the same for everybody in the hemisphere. And here's another thing that's interesting too, is that like even if this were accurate, why is it that the sun would rise and set at a different time every day if the earth were flat? How do they explain that?
Well, it doesn't, because it rises at a certain time. And,
No, but it changes every day over the course of the year.
but we
right?
have 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, but sunrise is 9:05 one day, and as we get closer to summer, sunrise is 5:56 a.m. instead.
Well, maybe the sun has a little bit of a wobble to it, accounting for the slight time changes.
Okay, well, that's not in the flat earther theory. And another thing though, how do you explain lunar eclipses?
Well, since the moon and the sun are roughly the same distance away, but proportionally the moon is the same, well, like roughly the same size of the sun that for the lunar eclipse, just the way that the sun is kind of rotating around the Earth, the moon is rotating around the sun.
Do you know how a lunar eclipse happens? Do you know how a lunar eclipse happens?
Yeah, the 50-meter or 50-kilometer sun passes behind the 50-kilometer away moon, and that's
The Earth.
That's what we see.
The Earth comes
No.
between them.
No, the Bible says that it doesn't.
The Earth comes between them, and the sun, it casts a shadow onto the moon, right? That's what happens, and this cannot happen in a flat Earth scenario where the sun is always above us. So we would never have a lunar eclipse if we were on a flat Earth.
I disagree.
Okay. But here's the thing, right? So what I've been trying to do is refute the science. That's the parascience, the pseudoscience that the flat earthers use. But one thing that I encountered, it's not even so much about the science as it is the mistrust. So there's several papers in psychology talking about, what we need to do instead is, instead of just trying to point out their flaws in the science and correcting the flat earthers on their science, what we need to do is think about the psychology behind it, because they'll never believe the science if they don't want to. And not all flat earthers are science deniers. They just believe their science, the pseudoscience. And what really makes it all tricky is that there are people who are persuasive enough and know a few little words to make it dangerous and make their YouTube videos really persuasive. So what we need to do, instead of, this half an hour of arguing the science or whatever it is, we should be keeping the explanations a little bit more simple. They say less is more because the flat earthers either aren't interested in hearing our explanations or they get lost in the overcomplicated science because for some of these people, there's a lack of scientific literacy. Not for all, but for some. So they're either not interested in actually hearing it or they get lost in it. And the best way to reach them would be to make the same kind of alluring YouTube videos that these conspiracy theories are, but to make government officials and scientists more trustworthy.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
I know, right?
Government's trustworthy?
Yeah. Because I think that's really what most of it comes down to for these flat earthers. It's not so much about, believing that the earth is actually flat. It's the mistrust of authority. I really believe that.
So the flat earthers have to take science on faith? Take a leap of faith
again
to believe it?
Go watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And speaking of faith, a lot of these flat earthers are also creationists, right? Because the Bible has these references to, as you said, the four corners of the earth.
That's referenced a number of times.
Oh my God. The people who believe in every single word of the Bible as written fact. It's not people. It's just a good story. Creationism is just a story, not evolution. But we're not getting into that today because that's another whole series of podcasts.
But just going back to creating YouTube videos that talk about the science and make them interesting, one YouTube video channel that you should check out is one called Sci-Man Dan.
Oh, he's great.
He looks around, he searches YouTube for flat Earth videos and totally destroys them.
It's hilarious.
In a fun and entertaining way.
It's very fun. Very fun.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard of him or seen his videos, go check him out. He's great. All right, well, I think that's it for today. We'll leave it there.
Sure. Yep. Again, we'll kind of, agree to disagree, but also kind of agree because you were taking the devil's advocacy point of view here anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll leave it there for this week on Science versus Conspiracy over coffee. Let us know in the comments what you guys think. Are you a flat earther? Are you science? What's your theory on it? Or do you have a completely different take on the flat earth theory?
Yeah, we're definitely open to listening, and we love it when people point out things to us that make us think. Because, as I always say, stay curious, but rely on the facts.
If you like the video, hit the subscribe button to see more content. We release new videos every Monday, and our podcast is released every Friday. I've left the links in the description. And remember, being paranoid is smart. We'll see you next time.
Remember, being paranoid